In today's video, what I'm going to show everybody is how to get rid of an ugly texture, like maybe this example here, or this one, or even this one. If you've got a texture on your walls or ceiling and you want to get rid of it, I'm going to show you a way to do that with skim coating, and I'll explain what else skim coating is for right after this. Alright, welcome back to That Kilted Guy videos here on YouTube, where it's my goal to teach you guys how to do your own home improvement projects, to empower you to save some money, complete it yourself, and take pride in workmanship, and we're going to teach you how to do it right. That's why that's our slogan here. So if you comment down below, put the hashtag do it right. Now what we're going to talk about today is a common subject on the internet. A lot of people want to know about this, and it's skim coating. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, what it's used for, what you shouldn't use it for, why it could be a huge waste of your time, and we're going to show you one technique today. If you want to see a simpler technique, we're going to show you that in a separate video, so be sure and subscribe and click that bell icon. If you click the bell icon, you get notified of future videos. If you don't click it, all you've done is subscribe, and you may very well miss other videos we put out because it won't notify you. And I'm going to scroll some other information across the bottom of the screen here and there, so check that out too. But let's get into discussing this. Number one, let me talk a little bit about what skim coating is good for. One is, of course, getting rid of an ugly texture. Like we've got this texture here, which is a video I'm going to be doing on how to do a swirl texture. But let's say you find this ugly, or you've got something like this and it's ugly and you want to get rid of it. You actually can. You can even get rid of popcorn ceilings this way, but if it's scrapable, I'd recommend scraping it like we did in this video. But if it's been painted too much, or it has asbestos and you don't want to remove it, you can skim coat over it. It's quite a bit of work, but you can do it. So that's one reason to do it, is to get rid of an ugly texture. Now after you do that, you could change it to a different texture, or you could leave it smooth. So that's actually another reason. If you want a smooth finish, you can do that. And even if you're starting with new construction and you want a smooth finish, that's another reason to use a skim coat. That's how you get a level 5, which is the smoothest of smooth. That's smoother than a baby's butt, I'm telling you, if you know how to do it right. And I'm going to give you some pointers on that today. So if you're doing a smooth finish, for example, you do all your finishing like normal, get it as good as you can, and then you skim coat everything. You sand it with like 220 or 320 grit paper, and you get a really smooth finish. Although there is another step to that, and I'll teach you that in a separate video about how to do a smooth finish. Another reason would be to use it for a situation where you have a lot of minor damage. And when I say minor, I mean very minor. You can't, let's discuss some of the things you can't use this for. You can't really use this to fix things like humps. If you've got bad butt joints, they didn't get coated right, you scraped off the popcorn, whatever, and you've got humps on your ceiling or wall, skim coating is not the way to get rid of it. You need to float them out first and then skim coat it. It also won't get rid of damage, like say in these examples here. If you've got mud that's pulled loose, it's broken, skim coating is a thin coat. It's just not meant to get rid of heavy things. Plus it's really kind of a waste of energy, and I'll explain that in a minute. Another thing you shouldn't use it for is cracks. If you've got a cracked wall or ceiling, don't just skim coat over it. It may look good for a while, but most likely in a week, a day, a month, it's going to come back, so don't do that either. So I hear all the time, oh, I'll just fix it, I'm going to skim coat everything and I'll fix it that way. Well, let me give you an example of why you might not want to do that. Because let's say you scraped a popcorn ceiling. Whenever you do, you almost always end up with, let's just pretend these are the screws here. You almost always end up with screws that all need coated again. Something about scraping it, it just pulls the mud out. You've got to coat them again at least once, sometimes twice. So if you skim coat it to fix all these little defects all over, you're wasting your time, and I'll show you that in a second. The other reason may be because you scraped your ceiling and you tore little tiny bits of paper here and there. Don't just skim coat everything. Again, that's a waste of time. So here's what I would do. In this case, I would just spot that, and spot that. We slide spot them, but still, you're only working on that little area and then over here on that little area. Okay, so the problem with trying to fix these little bitty areas by skim coating the whole thing is often when you skim coat it all, these are going to shrink down a little bit. They almost always do. And so in order to get this to be flat, you've got to sand this whole area down until this basically shows flat. That's going to create a ton of dust. It's going to waste a lot of material that you didn't need to put out here, and a lot of effort. The easiest way to fix, say, a popcorn damaged ceiling after you've scraped it is just to go through and fix each individual item. Unless you're trying to get that smooth finish, you just don't need to do that. So don't use skim coating as a panacea fix for everything. Okay, now let's get into the way that we're going to fix this today. And this could be one of the things you want to fix, get rid of that texture, change it, but we're going to fix this one. And this texture here, this was a demo I did on comparing knockdown texture knives. So I purposely kind of messed it up. So if you had something like this, well, we can fix that. First step, whether it's been painted or not, is I would go through and sand everything. I would recommend you get you a pole sander if you're going to do very much sanding. These are just so much faster. You can see they swivel and turn as you need them to and move in all angles, and they cover a lot of area fast. Now if you do sand at an angle like this, don't sand straight on or straight this way. If you go this way, they tend to like to flip and do some more damage. If you go in too straight of a line, you'll actually send grooves into the surface. So just go over everything, sand it, which I've already done. You're basically trying to knock off the little sharp points because there will be just little goobers basically on the wall, and as you hit those with your knife, skim coating, it's going to make it chatter, just make more work for you. So do that. Depending on the texture, you may actually want to go over it with a knife. Just go over and scrape everything, because this will actually do more than the sand pole, especially if it's been painted. When it's been painted, the sand pole won't really touch it very much. It'll take off the little bit of peaks, but this will scrape even more off. So you kind of have to feel. One way to know is go back over it with your knife. If you feel it jumping and chattering, you probably need to scrape it and do a little more work. So you want to get it to where there's not too many of those. Now keep in mind that skim coating is a lot of work, so be prepared for that. So there's several ways you can put it on. If you're into the Hawk Trowel, you can put it on that way. I may demonstrate that. If you're into a painted knife, you can put it on that way. You can even roll it on, but I'm going to show you in a separate video how you would roll it on. Okay, let's say you want to use a Hawk Trowel. That's fine, whatever you have. And be aware that if you need any of these tools, I've got links in the description down below. Just click on around that title area and you can open up the description. And I've got an Amazon store where I show everything that's in these videos, and I help guide you to the right tool so you don't waste your money. Now, I'll tell you that I'm not a Hawk fan guy. I'll tell you straight up that I don't use a Hawk Trowel on a daily basis. I have used them a number of times, mainly for doing certain textures. So it's not my forte. I think they both work well. So use what works for you, but I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate this. So I'll just put that little bit on with a Hawk Trowel, and it does work really good. But now I'm going to switch to a painted knife. Okay, doing it with a painted knife, I would use a 12-inch or a 14-inch. I'm going to go ahead and use a 12. We don't have that much area to cover here. And what you're trying to do is put it on just a little bit thicker than the surface depth of what you're trying to cover. So in this case, we're trying to cover this texture, and I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but the texture is just showing through. So what you want to do is put it on just a little bit thicker than the depth of the texture that you're trying to cover, because you need a little bit of extra thickness because it will shrink back, and when you sand it, you don't want to sand and have this coming back through because it may actually show again. So put it on just thick enough to hide it good. So I'm going to put a little thicker here. Let's go across. Now if you get voids like that, I'm running out of mud and don't feel like getting any more, just put you a little more on there and go back over it. Now, for those of you that aren't real good at spreading mud, let me give you a little quick primer here. First of all, we're using an all-purpose mud. I like it because it sands really easy. You can use the Green Label all-purpose mud like you see here in this picture, and it'll work, but it tends to shrink a little bit more. It's a little bit more sticky and gummy, and it's harder to sand. So if you're going to do much of this, find your lightweight mud. Okay, here's the basic primer for spreading this. I was spreading my mud around, I got a little bit more. What you want to do is get you a pretty good load, whatever you can handle. You don't want to get so much that it's going to start running down, dripping on you, whatever. And you want this to be fairly heavy. The mud as it comes out of a box or a bucket can vary in thickness. Usually for this, you'd probably want it straight out of the box. But if it feels too thick, you can thin it down. You can see if I hold it here, it's not really very drippy, but if I shake it enough, it will. So it's not super thick either, but you definitely don't want it too thin. The thinner it is, the more it'll drip. It's harder to keep it from dripping like that, and it'll shrink more the more water you have in it. So then, once you load your knife up, put it up here so it's at about roughly a 45-degree angle, and push pretty firmly. And as you pull across the wall, you're laying your hand over. If you can see that motion. So start here, push firm, and lay the knife over as you go, and that's spreading it out. Then work it down to the right thickness. Like here, we got it way too thick. So that's roughly the right thickness. Now you have to smooth it out. There's a couple ways we're going to show you how to do that. You can use your knife. If you do that, you want to pay attention to which direction you're going to go. I'm going to go from left to right. So I want to put slightly more pressure, just very slightly more on the leading edge, so that I'm not leaving that mark behind me. I want to leave, as far as on the left side, I want to leave this soft edge. And I'll show you a picture of that. It's called a lap mark. Those are easier to fix. If you dig in on this side, you could have a low spot right there, and then it's more sanding and more work. So try and leave smooth lap marks. Okay, I thought I would illustrate this for you. So here you see the deep knife mark I'm saying not to leave. And in this case, you would have to sand off everything above the red line, compared to a lap mark like this illustration here, where you just have to remove that little high peak above the red line. So it's much easier to sand lap marks. So you could go over it like that and just get it fairly smooth. That will work. Or if you want to break out the trowel, these work really well, and this is called a pull trowel. These rounded edges tend to not leave those sharp edges as much. They're gentler. Let me get and a pull trowel actually works really well for skim coating. So there's one way, but let's just say I rough this up a little bit again. Okay, it's roughed up a little bit. You can use this Magic Trowel. These are pretty forgiving for amateurs because it's basically like a giant squeegee, but it's a little bit different. So I like to wet the edge so it doesn't drag so much. Now you just go over it, and you have to apply a decent amount of pressure with this, but even if I try, it's kind of hard to make that edge over there. So that's what I mean, they're more forgiving because of the softness of them. And you can see pretty much that quick we have it. Now I picked up a scratch right there. In that case, I would go over it again. But I purposely left a few defects. And I'm going to take a picture of those to make the point that you see this defect here. It's just a tiny little void. You're going to have some of those. So after you sand all this smooth, you're going to get a light out and side light it. Okay, so after you get it all smoothed out and then you've let it dry, what you're going to do is sand it, and then you want to take and side light it. The best way is like closed blinds in that. You don't want it totally dark, but you want this to be doing the majority of the side lighting. And if you can see on the camera there, it's showing all of the defects. That one right there just jumps out because side lighting magnifies all the shadows and the imperfections, where straight on lighting doesn't. So once you've done all that, you've sanded it, you come back, you see these little defects, just touch them up. If you're trying to do a smooth finish, a level 5, I'll show you some tricks on that in a future video. Okay, here's a picture of this exact thing after it's dried, and I sanded one half of it. So on the right hand side you can see it's sanded, and on the left it's not, and you can see the texture is still trying to show through on the left hand side because it always shrinks back a little bit, so it needs sanded. Now note that I sanded it with 80 grit here because that's just what I had on my pole. I would definitely break out at least 220 grit because 80 grit's a little aggressive and it does leave sanding marks like you can see here. Hey, which way did you prefer? The knife, the Magic Trowel, or the pole trowel? Let me know in the comments below. I really appreciate your comments. They help us out, and I like to converse with you guys, and I'm glad to answer questions. And I hope you'll check out our Patreon page where you can help support our efforts to put out these videos for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate it. But if that helped you out, let me know, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.